Yo, what's up guys? It's Noah here, and in today's video, gonna be talking about some player props I like on Prizepicks for the Week 9 NFL slate. Got 3 picks I'm gonna give out in this video, guys. We're gonna talk about the 3 plays I like this week. We're gonna share why I like them. Before we do, make sure you guys hit that like button down below. If you have not yet, hit that subscribe button as well. Also, if you're new to Prizepicks, check them out. Sign up with my promo code NOAH. You will get your first deposit matched up to $100 when you do sign up with my promo code. But let's talk through the picks I like this week. For week 9 of the NFL slate, got 3 picks to give out in this video. First play that we're going to talk about that I do like this week is going to be in the rush plus receiving yards category. Talk about Aaron Jones here, 93.5 rush plus receiving yards. I like the over here for Aaron Jones. For one thing, the reason I like this prop is just it's a really, really good matchup here. The Packers are going to be going up against the Lions. The Lions have been one of the worst defensive teams in the NFL this season. I know they're giving up the most points per game. They've also been a pretty bad team against the run. So far this season, the Lions, in terms of rushing yards, receiving yards allowed to running backs, they've given up the 6th most rushing yards to opposing running backs, 860 rushing yards. In terms of like fantasy points, they're giving up a lot of fantasy points to running backs as well, which kind of correlates there. Now, actually, in the receiving game, they've actually done a pretty good job limiting opposing running backs. They've only given up the 2nd fewest receiving yards. But we know that Aaron Jones is going to have a massive workload both on the ground and through the air. I mean, the Packers are so banged up at the wide receiver position that they've basically been using Aaron Jones as one of their top pass catchers. Not only is he their top running back, but he's also been one of their top pass catchers. His involvement in the passing game has been pretty crazy this season. I'm pretty sure he's averaging about 5 targets per game. Last week he had 5 targets. The week before that against Washington, they were playing from behind, and Aaron Jones had 10 targets in that game. But he's coming off a big game against Buffalo where he ran for 143 yards, also had 14 receiving yards. This is a matchup where I think we should expect Aaron Jones to be very, very efficient on the ground. I know in terms of like rushing yards per game, I want to say the Lions are giving up a lot of rushing yards per game, 6th most in the league, 122.9 rushing yards per game. They're giving up to opposing running backs. So this is definitely a spot where Aaron Jones should be efficient on the ground. He's coming off a big game where he had over 100 rushing yards. The reason I like his rush plus receiving yards is because Aaron Jones is involved a lot in the passing game. His rushing yard prop this week is set at 65.5. I could see a scenario where Aaron Jones finishes with like 55 rushing yards, but then gets like 40 receiving yards or something, because they will use him a ton in the passing game. I mean, you can look at his receiving yards the last few weeks. I mean, he had a game where he had 53 receiving yards, 25, 14, 17. Like, usually he's going to get at least 15 to 20 receiving yards. He's going to get at least 3, 4, 5 targets. He's a really explosive running back. He's a guy that can take, a short pass and take it, 10, 15, 20 yards down the field. I think in this matchup, obviously, in terms of rushing yards, he should be very efficient on the ground. So I'm expecting him to have a pretty big workload both on the ground and through the air. This game does have a very, very high total, so we should see a lot of points scored in this one. Right now, this Lions-Packers game, 49.5 total, which is tied for highest on the slate. The Packers have a 26.5 team total, which I know is one of the highest on the slate. Obviously, Vegas is expecting the Packers to put up some points this week. They should be able to do so against this bad Lions defense. I think Aaron Jones should be very efficient in this matchup. He should have a big game this week, and 93.5 rushing plus receiving yards does feel too low here. If Jones gets like 12 to 15 carries and 4 to 5 targets, he's got a very good chance to get like 60, 70 rushing yards and at least 20, 30 receiving yards, just with how much they use him in the passing game too. And by some chance, if things go south and the Packers get behind here, like the Packers offense has not been great this season, so like no one would be surprised if they lost this game or if they were playing from behind. If they do get behind, we know Aaron Jones is going to be out there catching passes. And if they're playing with the lead, Aaron Jones is still going to be out there getting plenty of carries. So that's kind of why I like rushing plus receiving yards. I think you have multiple outs there. And I do want to mention that right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, Aaron Jones' rush plus receiving yards prop is actually set at 99.5, whereas on Prizepicks is only 93.5. So this is probably going to get bumped at some point. I did want to go ahead and get it in on Friday night when I'm making this video, and hopefully you guys can get it all in at 93.5 as well. But that's the first prop that I like for this week, is going to be Aaron Jones to have more than 93.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Also do like his over on 65.5 rushing yards, but I'm going to be playing the rush plus receiving just for the sake of this video. And then the other 2 props I like are going to be fantasy score props. So going to go back to a guy that I played last week. We took Kyle Pitts over 34.5 receiving yards last week. Kyle Pitts had a big game, 80 receiving yards. He found the end zone. This week, I like his fantasy score, 9.5 fantasy points for Kyle Pitts. Also, going to be taking the over on this one. So if you look over his last 5 games, Kyle Pitts, he's gone over this in 3 out of his last 5 games. He had one of his best games of the season if not his best game of the season last week against Carolina. Finished with 19 fantasy points. I believe he had 9 targets in that game, 5 catches for 80 yards, and he did get into the end zone, had a touchdown. Kyle Pitts has had a very, very up and down season. He's basically been like a boom bust tight end. I can read you his game logs this season, and you can just tell by his game log it's either boom or bust. First game of the season, 2 catches, 19 yards. 2 catches, 19 yards. 5 catches, 87 yards. So good game there. 1 catch, 25 yards. 3 catches, 19 yards, but he did catch a touchdown that week. Then 3 catches for 9 yards, and then last week 5 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Even the week where he had 3 catches for 19 yards, he still went over his fantasy points that week because he did get into the end zone. Kyle Pitts has had 2 touchdowns this season. He got into the end zone last week. He's had a touchdown in 2 out of his last 3 games. He is going to be one of their focal points on offense. This Falcons team, they're going to run the ball a lot. That's just what they do. But on the games where they get behind and Marcus Mariota has to throw a little bit more, you're going to see Kyle Pitts get a lot of targets. He got 9 targets last week. So far this season, he's second on the team with a 23% target share. He's actually got the 3rd highest target share among all tight ends. Only tight ends with a bigger target share than Kyle Pitts this season are Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. So we know the targets are going to be there. The Falcons, they might only throw the ball 20, 25 times, but even if Marcus Mariota throws the ball 20, 25 times, that could still mean 7, 8, 9 targets for Kyle Pitts. I think it's also kind of a good matchup here against the Chargers. For one thing, this is another game that does have a pretty high total. Right now, this game between the Chargers and Falcons does have the highest total on the slate. It's tied with the Packers and Lions game. 49.5 total here between the Chargers and the Lions. This game's being played in Atlanta, so it's indoors. I think anytime games are being played inside in a dome, it's always more likely that there's a little bit of a shootout. You don't have to worry about any weather or anything like that. So this game has a high total. We're expected to see points scored in this game. Last week, Marcus Mariota threw the ball 28 times. You saw Kyle Pitts get 9 targets. I think Marcus Mariota could throw the ball a little bit more this week. The Chargers this season, in terms of their defense, they've been solid. They've not been the best defensive team. But even though the Falcons want to establish the run, Kyle Pitts should still be involved in the passing game when they do throw. He's one of their best weapons. They need to get him the ball. He got the ball last week. He had a big game. Hopefully, they look to get him the ball again this week. There's a lot of ways that he could go over 9.5 fantasy points this week. He could get into the end zone again. If he catches a touchdown, he's almost certainly going to finish with more than 9.5 fantasy points. He could get 9 targets and have 5 catches for 50 yards, and that would put him over fantasy points. He could have 7 catches for 40 yards or something like that. There's just so many ways for him to hit this fantasy score. I kind of like all his props this week. I think a lot of his props do look a little bit too low. His receiving yards is set at 40.5. Kind of like that over too, but again, Pitts could go under his receiving yards, but still go over fantasy points because he could get into the end zone. His reception prop set at 3.5. I kind of like that one too. I have a feeling that if he goes over receiving yards and he goes over receptions, he's probably going to go over fantasy score as well. And I could see him going under receiving yards, under receptions, but still going over fantasy score because, again, he could catch a touchdown. That's the one reason I do like fantasy score, is just because you can get multiple ways to go over, whether it be just having a big game or getting into the end zone. Obviously, you're always hoping to get touchdowns when you take fantasy score, but you don't have to get them. So that's why I like this fantasy score prop for Kyle Pitts, 9.5. Hopefully, we see another big Kyle Pitts game this week. Hopefully, the Falcons continue to get him the ball in the passing game. He's been their top target this season, one of their top targets. I know Drake London has not been as involved lately the last few weeks. Maybe that could mean more targets coming to Kyle Pitts. But that's that's going to be our second prop for this week. And then third and final prop, we're going to talk about another fantasy score prop that I like. Kyler Murray, 19.5 fantasy points for Kyler Murray. Also like the over here. So if you look at Kyler Murray the last few weeks, especially last week against Minnesota, had a really good game, 26.6 fantasy points. He's only gone over this prop in 2 out of their last 5 games. But one reason I like this prop, for one, this is another game that is expected to be very high scoring. 49 total here between the Cardinals and the Seahawks. This game is tied for the second highest total on the slate, only behind the 2 games we just talked about. So Vegas is expecting a good amount of points scored in this Arizona-Seattle game. This is another game that is being played indoors, so there's definitely a chance, I think a lot more likely chance for a shootout when you don't have to worry about weather or anything like that. This game's being played indoors. We know Kyler Murray is a dual-threat quarterback. He's a guy that offers a lot of upside. He can have a game where he throws for a lot of yards and gets multiple touchdowns. He can also have games where he runs for a lot of yards and potentially gets rushing touchdowns. I don't know exactly how much he's been running lately. I'll pull that up real quick. But we know, Kyler Murray is always a threat to get it done with his legs. Like last week, he only had 36 rushing yards, but he's had a game earlier this season against Seattle, same matchup against Seattle. He ran for 100 yards. I think he did go over his fantasy score last time he played Seattle, I do believe. Or actually, he might have came up just short in that game. He had 100 rushing yards against Seattle and still went under his fantasy score. Yeah, 16.8 fantasy points, but he had no touchdowns in that game. 222 passing yards, no passing touchdowns, 100 rushing yards, no rushing touchdowns. I would think that Kyler's a pretty big favorite to at least get like one touchdown this week, if not multiple touchdowns. I'm going to take a look at his passing touchdown prop right now on DK Sportsbook, see what it's at. So it's at 1.5. It's basically even money at 1.5, but he's a pretty good favorite to at least throw for one touchdown. I think 250 yards, one passing touchdown, maybe 40, 50 rushing yards, that could get it done for Kyler. Just doing the math in my head, I think that would put him over, put him really close. 19.5 fantasy points, I think definitely is too low for Kyler here. This game should be high scoring. We know Kyler's going to be able to get it done in multiple ways, on the ground, through the air. He's got DeAndre Hopkins now as well, which I think benefits him. Obviously, having one of his top weapons, offense should be a little bit more efficient. This team could be still missing James Conner this week, so without James Conner, we could see Kyler throw the ball a lot here. They could lean on his arm a lot. Last week, he threw the ball 44 times. Game script might have kind of forced him to do that, but most weeks Kyler is going to throw the ball 35, 40 times, and potentially more if they get behind and are trailing. But I think we'll see a lot of points scored in this Cardinals-Seahawks game. I think Kyler's got a good chance to go over 19.5 fantasy points. And for what it's worth, the projections that I do look at, that I pay a lot of attention to, they have Kyler Murray projected for well over 19.5 fantasy points. They actually have him for 23.3 fantasy points. So that's definitely a big gap. Rarely do you see a nearly 4-point difference in fantasy score between the projections on Prizepicks and the projections that I look at. Anytime there's a big difference like that, that's usually going to be a bet that I always am kind of interested to take. So that's what I'm liking for this week, guys, for the Week 9 NFL slate. These are kind of my first looks at the board as of Friday night when I'm making this video. I'm going to take a look at the board again sometime probably on Saturday night. I will be sharing some more plays I like this week over on Patreon. If you guys do want to get more Prizepicks plays from me, NFL, NBA, I provide those over on Patreon. You can check that out, link down below in the description. But as always, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Wish you the best of luck this week. Appreciate you watching. Hit that like button if you guys did enjoy. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. Also, check out Prizepicks. Make sure to sign up for Prizepicks. Look on the screen right now, bottom of the screen. Use promo code NOAH when you do sign up for Prizepicks. You will get your first deposit matched up to $100. But best of luck this week, guys. Thanks as always for watching the video. Appreciate you checking out the channel. Good luck. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.